Let's return to Canberra now. It's a busy sitting week. Many things are focused, including this foreign interference threat that was highlighted last night by the ASIO chief, Mike Burgess. Let's go live back to Canberra. The Shadow Communications Minister, Michelle Rowland, joins us now. Thanks so much for your time. Foreign interference worse now than during the Cold War. Does that mean we have been underestimating the threat from China?
It is deeply disturbing, as you say. I think the comments by the ASIO chief here reflect two things. Firstly, that the utilisation of technology has fundamentally changed the way in which these individuals and groups operate. And secondly, I think it does show that we are very much, as the security agencies would say, Australia is very much alive to it. Our agencies, and I think the public at large, would know now that Australia produced, of course, the Christchurch terrorist. That was a wake-up call for many people. But I think ultimately it comes down to understanding and properly resourcing our agencies. It is strangely comforting, though, Laura, that the very measured comments, I think, by the ASIO chief here demonstrate, as I said, they're alive to it, but also, whilst it is deeply disturbing, I should reiterate that this is an area of bipartisanship. The number one priority of parliaments is to keep their citizens safe. So we have bipartisanship on that. It is a global issue as well. Part of his speech highlighted how some individuals are being involved in what are global groups, and extremism is extremism in any form.
Foreign interference, the rise of white supremacy, the rise of terrorism, not to be confused with the plateauing threat diminishing at all. Yes, there is a strong area of bipartisanship here, Michelle Rowland, but the government has and does want to go further, particularly when it comes to perhaps looking at some encrypted messages. Does Labor support that move?
Well, we acted in the national interest last time when this encryption legislation was put forward. And that was the right call. It was the right call in the national interest, despite the fact that we were criticised by many sectors. It was also the right process undertaken by the Intelligence and Security Committee, which again is a bipartisan committee which comprises individuals who I think are respected across the parliament and widely across the sector. So these things need to, the balancing between the need for enforcement powers and citizens' rights is one that's been there for time immemorial. But I do think that this is a wake-up call. You also talked about the issue of political interference. Some of the examples that were given in that speech, deeply disturbing. And I mean, as a local member of parliament, what was described there, a case in which there was an individual who had ingratiated himself with the community, had become in effect a community leader. It does bring home that these are people who are very sophisticated. These are people who are very smart. And it's an area that we are going to clearly have to continue focusing on. But we live in a democracy, and it's pleasing to see that the head of our spy agency has responded and has delivered this address with such candour, but also clearly with a mind to understanding this threat isn't going away and not downplaying the risk.
I just want to move on to another policy area, 2050 emissions reduction target of net zero emissions, that is in 30 years' time. This was a big problem for you at the last election. What has changed in the messaging?
Well, the issue here is that this is the policy that we have had supporting the Paris Agreement. It's the policy that the Liberal Party has had. I don't think it's so much a question of the messaging here, Laura. I think it is a question of the policy being right. I fully appreciate, and it was even They're in black and white in our review about the issue of costings and the way in which the government was able to whip up a scare campaign.
Now, what did the review say, though? The review talked about costing, didn't it? And Labor unable to answer those questions, really hurting you, particularly in Queensland.
It wasn't only, I think, there's that aspect, of course, but it was also the way in which the government acted at the time as well. I think that it is a bold policy, but it's certainly not a radical one. It's one that this government has in fact signed up to through the Paris Agreement.
Though, can you?
Oh, I fully anticipate the scare campaign, Laura. I've seen this movie. I've been in it for 10 years. So fully expect that will happen. But I'll tell you this, Laura, the organisations in our society who create jobs, the business community, those peak bodies who represent those communities, some of Australia's largest companies, they all support this target. They are all looking for investor certainty. Gladys Berejiklian is no radical. She's the Premier of New South Wales, but at heart she's also a businesswoman. She understands.
You've got problems though when you've got people like Tony Marr from the Farmers Federation, who in their own stated policy in 2018 have trending. They want to trend towards carbon neutral in 2030, and they're still not backing in your policy. I mean, you're copying it from all fronts here. What's your plan?
Well, Laura, we understand that Australians want action on climate change, and we understand that there is uncertainty about how we go about that. What we need right now is some leadership. We need some consensus to bring together those various parties. And as I said, the business community are calling for it. Members of Scott Morrison's own government are calling for it. Conservative leaders are calling for it, not only in Australia but in the UK, for example. So Scott Morrison is out on a limb here, and his hysterical performance yesterday, that is a sign of what is to come. But I take the view, and this is one of the lessons I learnt from Bob Hawke, it's arm yourself with the facts, arm yourselves with the science. What is the cost of inaction here? And we have the research that's been done by the CSIRO and by the University of Melbourne that shows what the cost of inaction is. It's a 20-to-1 benefit from acting. So we can either go down the path of having a hit to the economy that's greater than what the Great Depression was, or we can bring these groups together, show some leadership, as has been done in other jurisdictions. Clearly Scott Morrison's not up for that. But I tell you what, Laura, I've been around here for 10 years and the climate wars were going on before that. And people wonder why there is distrust in the political process.
Feels like it's going to go on for another 10 years too, I've got to say. Michelle Rowland, thanks so much for your time.
Well, I hope not, Laura, but thank you.
So do we.